This happened about 4 months ago when I'd come home from college for spring break. Most people my age would probably have gone to the beach, but I was eager to get home and see my parents and friends who I hadn't seen since I left the previous year. It was a fairly small and quiet little community I lived in. I guess you could call it a Mayberry of some sort. Everyone knew each other and got along like peas in a pod. Crime always seemed to be at a low, and nothing really happened. And so, anytime something did happen, it was bound to be talked about. That's why when the news of the serial killer having been spotted in the area struck, everybody talked about it. I'd show up just around the time when everyone was talking about it, and at first, I just thought it was the typical kind of gossip. You know, that usually wasn't true. But then I saw the report on the news, which confirmed the whole thing. Now, most people knew me as a pretty paranoid person. I could never go anywhere by myself, especially at night. Heck, I even had trouble walking back to my dorm room alone. My parents knew this, and it just so happened to be the very week I'd gotten back. They had been planning to leave on a second honeymoon type of getaway, and were a little wary of leaving me home alone. I didn't want to ruin things for them, so I assured them I was a big girl now and could take care of myself. And so they reluctantly left, but made me promise I'd lock all the doors and windows at night so that I'd be okay. I promised, but even if I hadn't, I'd still lock the doors. I wasn't the type of person to leave them unlocked anyway. The day after they left, I invited my best friend Becky over for a sleepover. I hadn't talked to her all that much since I got started with college, aside from the usual Skype and Facebook methods of chatting, but it wasn't the same as talking in person, and plus, my studies usually kept me pretty busy. Now, she was actually quite the horror fanatic, and lived in a slightly different neighborhood than me. We spent some time up in my room chatting for a bit. She kept trying to bring up the whole serial killer thing with me, but I made it known I didn't want to talk about it. She accused me of being a wimp, but I just laughed it off. After we ended our conversation, we went downstairs to pick a movie to watch, and I made the mistake of letting her pick, and she ended up deciding on Halloween. She insisted it was appropriate, but I didn't know why she was treating this like it was a holiday. But still, she was my guest and my friend, so I didn't complain. When she started the movie, I was in the kitchen getting some popcorn ready. I also had some music playing on the radio, just to drown out the noises from the television, and was tuned in with one of the songs, humming along as I waited for the popcorn to finish popping. My concentration was suddenly broken as a sudden loud scream broke through the air. I jumped and ran straight into the living room, where Becky sat with a somewhat freaked out look on her face. I had asked her what happened. She said she didn't know. It hadn't been her that had screamed. And at first, I thought it was just the movie, but it wasn't even at the scary part yet. After calming down, I went back into the kitchen and got the popcorn. We decided it had been probably just the wind, since it had been blowing furiously that night. When the movie finished, we ended up going to bed, and the next morning, Becky had to go home, so I walked her out to her car, caught up in a bit of a rushed conversation. And that's when we noticed the police cars and the ambulance next door. This alarmed me a little bit. I knew the people who lived there. It was a sweet older couple, with a daughter about 12 or 13 years old, I think, and 2 little boys. I'd met them before at a couple of neighborhood parties. They were pretty nice people. And as a concerned neighbor, I decided to go over to find out what had happened. And so while Becky drove off, I walked down the sidewalk until I was at the front of their house. I saw the mother. She was sitting on the porch crying, while her husband sat next to her. It didn't sound like the normal kind of cry. It sounded heartbroken. Before I could even approach them and ask what was going on, the front door opened, and one by one some paramedics came out hauling 3 bodies on stretchers. Then I remembered last night, and I didn't think that the scream had been wind. Horrified, all I could do was quickly offer my condolences and rush back to my house, making sure all the doors and windows were firmly locked. Sure, it was daytime, and horror movie logic said that killers never struck in the daytime, but try telling that to my overthinking brain. I didn't want to take any chances. Still shaken by what I'd seen, I fixed myself a bowl of cereal and turned on the TV, hoping to find some good old morning cartoon to take my mind off of things. But every channel seemed to be interrupted by a news broadcast, talking about the recent murders in my neighborhood. The reporters said that the parents had been out that night at dinner and hadn't come home until later. The house had been dark and quiet when they got back, so they assumed that the kids had just gone to bed. They hadn't known what had really happened until that morning, when the mother had gone upstairs to wake them all up for breakfast and found their bodies hanging from the ceiling. According to her, their eyes had been completely removed, nothing but bloody sockets left, and their stomachs looked to have been slashed open, all intestinal organs littered in a sloppy pile beneath them. Now, just hearing this little bit made me barf up a small portion of my cereal. I quickly changed the channel and was thankful to find a station that wasn't broadcasting the news events, but I didn't have the stomach to finish my breakfast. I'd known those kids. They'd never hurt anybody. In fact, I'd seen them outside playing with the family dog just the other day, and they were all so very happy. So who would be so heartless to take a child's life away from them? Something told me, however, if the parents had been home, they might have suffered the same fate as their children. I was supposed to have gone shopping with Becky that day, but I canceled out last minute, saying I wasn't feeling very well, instead asking if I could come over to her house that night for another sleepover to make up for it. She was okay with it, and I was grateful. I didn't want to be alone, especially with the fact that the supposed serial killer had just killed the kids next door. What if I were next? There was no way I was going to take that risk. Much to my dismay, Becky ended up picking out another horror movie to watch when I went over to her house. Luckily, I had my phone with me, so I just watched videos on my YouTube app until it was over with. So after the movie was done, we talked for a little bit and then went to bed. My mind was completely uneasy the whole time. However, I tried not to worry. I was in a completely different neighborhood, and I had nothing to worry about. When I got home the next day, I walked into the house to find it in a bit of an untidy state. I hadn't remembered leaving it like that, and I was suddenly scared. Within a flash, I had called the police and they showed up. I chose to remain out of the house while they investigated, and I didn't go back until I got the okay. They told me it had probably been just a botched robbery, but I knew they were just lying so that they wouldn't worry me. I'd known what had really happened. The killer had been in my house, but I hadn't been there, so he just left. I could have been killed. I could have ended up like those poor kids next door. And as that chilling realization came over me, I definitely did not want to be alone the next night either. I knew he would be back. I knew I could still be in danger. And even though I constantly told myself not to worry about it, it did me no good. Thankfully, Becky agreed to come over, despite acting annoyed about it. This time I opted to watch something other than a horror movie, and she went along with it since she saw how nervous I was acting. I needed to set my mind at ease somehow. I thought a Disney movie might help. I did manage to calm down eventually, even starting to forget about my worries for a little bit, as Becky made some sort of joke regarding a line a character said, and I giggled at it. I began to let my guard down, but I wish I hadn't. Halfway through the film, the powers suddenly went out, the TV shutting off, and the entire room went dark. My paranoia shot back and I nearly screamed, but then I reminded myself that the power going out was normal in our neighborhood. You could expect a blackout at least once a month here. Now, there were two options. We could wait until morning and have the power guy come take a look at it, but I wasn't willing to spend the entire night in a dark house. The second option, which would have been easier and an obvious choice, would be to go to the fuse box and flip a few switches until the power came back on. But you see, the fuse box was on the back side of the house, and there was no possible way I was going outside. Becky called me a big baby and decided that she would do it. Grabbing a flashlight, she unlocked the back door and went outside, leaving me alone in the still dark living room. I hugged my knees to my chest and just sat there the whole time, shivering every now and then. I knew I should have gone with her. I knew that I was just putting myself out as fish bait just sitting here, but I didn't know what else to do. My first instinct always was to panic and then act. An act that could possibly get me killed, and I didn't want that. After about 5 minutes, I realized that Becky hadn't come back yet. Instead of allowing myself to sit there and worry any longer, I pulled myself off the couch and walked out the back door, onto the deck and down the steps, where I found the flashlight laying on the ground. Still frightened, I picked it up and forced myself to take a step forward, my bare feet scratching against the rough grass. I called out for Becky, my voice quivering, but she didn't answer. An ear-piercing scream caused me to whirl around and drop the flashlight, and as I bent over to pick it up, I heard the sound of laughter in the dark and shone the light up to see Becky standing there, hunched over and laughing loudly. Now this had made me angry. She knew how easily scared I could get. Playing with my fear like that had not helped things any, but I still couldn't help but feel some relief at seeing that it had just been a prank. Once Becky stopped laughing, I demanded to know why she hadn't flipped the switch to get the power back on. She told me she tried to, but then she saw that the wires had been cut. There was no way to get any electricity back into the house. Now at first I didn't want to believe her, thinking she was just still trying to scare me again, but she swore it was true, and even took me over to the fuse box to show me. They had been cut. I don't know with what, but that sent a chill throughout my body. I backed away, all my worries suddenly looming up again. I started to tell Becky we should get back inside, but before either of us could move, some sort of blade whizzed right past us and pierced right through her neck, blood splurting out like a water fountain. She dropped to the ground, gurgling and choking, clawing at the blade to try and pry it loose, but it was no good. I stumbled back, only able to scream. I wanted to believe I'd fallen asleep on the couch and this was just a dream, but no, I knew it wasn't. I turned around, started to run back up the steps and into the house. I knew the home phone wasn't going to work, but I still had my cell phone on the coffee table. I could call 911. We could get help. Becky might be okay. But as I started back up those steps, I happened to look at my side and I caught a sight of something. Or someone. At least I couldn't tell if it was a person or not. All I could see was a pair of glowing blue eyes. I thought it was a deer at first, but as I shone my flashlight over, it darted away. Panicked, I shined the flashlight around in the thicket of trees nearby, but I couldn't make anything else out. The dying, choking noises from Becky brought me back to reality, and I bolted into the house, forgetting to lock the door behind me, and nearly stumbling into a lamp. I picked my phone up off the coffee table and started to dial 911, but then I noticed it wasn't on. The battery You see, I'd forgotten to charge the battery after I'd watched videos the other night. I didn't have time to charge it. I didn't have time to wait either. I couldn't wait. My best friend was dying in the backyard, and there was possibly some crazy killer lurking somewhere outside of my house. Or inside. I hadn't shut the back door. In a panic, I immediately slammed it shut and locked it, praying that I'd been quick enough. I knew Becky had set her phone aside before we started the movie. She usually didn't want any text messages or phone calls disrupting her, and I started to wonder if she left it next to mine. I searched the coffee table with my flashlight, but Becky's phone was nowhere in sight. I got down on my knees and began looking under the couch, the chairs, and even under the cushions, but I couldn't find it. But at that very moment, I heard it ring, that same generic ringtone like on any other phone. She'd never seen the point in changing it. I got up and looked over to the kitchen counter, where I could see the faint glow of the phone screen. Slowly, I walked over and picked it up, looking at the caller ID screen, hoping maybe it was her parents, or someone I could ask for help, but the number displayed was unknown. I didn't want to answer it. No, I wasn't going to. I didn't have time for it. I had to get help. I hit the reject button and tried calling 911, but then it started ringing again. Angered, I hit the reject button again. I thought it had just been a prank call, but now had not been the time for a prank call. I again tried to call 911, but it rang again. This time, I brought myself to answer it. "What do you want, you bastard?" I practically shouted into the phone, my emotions a mix of anger and fear. And no one on the other line said anything. There was just a brief moment of silence before someone spoke. "Look behind you," the voice said in a quiet and guttural voice. "What do you mean?" "Look, if this is just someone's idea of a sick prank, then..." Then there was a click and a busy signal. They'd hung up. I let the phone drop down to my side. I almost didn't know what was going on anymore. I just wanted to curl up and cry, but I didn't. I didn't even dial 911. For some insane reason or the other, I did as the voice had said to, and hesitantly turned around to be met with those same glowing eyes I'd seen outside. I set the flashlight back down on the counter, but quickly picked it back up and shone it where I saw the eyes. This time, the figure didn't move. He didn't dart away. He just stood there, staring at me, as I stared at him, frozen in complete fear and terror. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost like a corpse's, but he was very much alive. Pitch black hair partially covered his eyes, which were still glowing. I should have just run then, but I couldn't. I stood there, completely paralyzed, as the man moved towards me. Common sense hit me hard, and I started backing away until my back hit the kitchen counter. He was right over me now, leaning in closely. He still seemed to be staring at me, but his eyes, now that he was getting closer to me, I could see they weren't looking in any other direction. They seemed to be only fixated upwards. You could only see that kind of gaze in a blind person. Bewildered and afraid, I watched as he lifted his hand up. Something was clasped in his fingers. It was a small blade of some sort, a knife, I think. It was still coated in blood, Becky's blood, no doubt. He proceeded to pierce the edge of it through my cheek, cutting it open. Searing pain soared through my face, and I could only let out a sickly sob. Blood started streaming from my cheek down to my neck. The man lowered his blade, leaning his face a bit closer to mine, looking as if he were inhaling the scent of my blood. Then he stuck his tongue out and began to lick it, lapping up every last drop like it was ice cream. I cringed. I'd stopped sobbing at this point, but the tears still continued to fall out of my eyes. It was pretty well known that killers had their own way of doing things. I'd heard the stories. I'd seen movies. but nothing was as bad as experiencing it firsthand. It made me ill. At last he stopped and leaned back from me, running his tongue over the bits of blood still remaining on his lips. I saw this as my chance to try and get away, but he grabbed me before I even got the chance, inducing a vice-like grip on my arm. I struggled to get him to release me, but he wouldn't. "Don't," he said in that same quiet voice as on the phone. Remembering the report of the kids on TV, I stopped struggling. Despite him keeping his hold on my arm, I ended up sinking halfway to my knees and began to sob again. "Why?" I wanted to know. "Why are you doing this? What did I do?" The man didn't say anything, his hold still remaining. He knelt down, shoving his blade back into his pocket before using his other hand to reach out and grab my face, turning it to face his. He looked emotionless. It was almost like he was wearing a mask. "You weren't here," he said simply, offering no explanations as to what that meant. He let go of my face and reached back into his pocket to retrieve his blade again. "Now, get a good look at me, sweetheart. I might be the last thing you ever see." Then he shoved the blade into my right eye. I convulsed in pain and let out a scream before everything went to black. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. My parents were there. They'd instantly taken the first plane back home as soon as they heard what had happened. I had trouble remembering at first, until I felt the bandages covering the right side of my face. I couldn't see out of one eye, but was told when the police had found me, it had been gone right out of my socket. I was lucky to be alive, while Becky hadn't been so lucky. They found her body still in the backyard, her stomach slashed open, her guts spilled out. Her eyes were also gone, just like those kids. I felt bad for not staying for her funeral, but I didn't want to stay in town any longer. I ended my break early and headed back to college, spending most of my time secluded here in my room. It's been a while since the whole ordeal happened, but I can't forget it. You know how they say it takes longer for emotional wounds to heal rather than physical wounds? Well, it's true. I do have nightmares. I can still see that blade piercing through Becky's throat. I could still see those glowing eyes and that cold, emotionless face. I haven't been able to sleep all that well lately, and it's really ruined my focus on studying for exams. I've mainly been living off of coffee just to get myself through the day. By now, I was kind of famous. I was known as the only living survivor of the Sightless Slaughterer. That's what they called him now. I never really had told anyone what had happened aside from the police, and I don't know why I waited until now. Maybe because of what had happened this morning, even though I should have seen it coming. Forgive the pun. Horror movie logic says that the killer should never leave the last one standing alone, that they'd come back to get them in some way. But knowing this, I still wasn't prepared. It'd been one of those rare nights when I actually managed to get some sleep, so I felt pretty good. I went down and I got my mail. It was just a few bills and a magazine, alongside a small package. I didn't recognize the name of the sender, so I didn't open it right away. I waited until I got back from classes later on. I would eventually have to open it, so why wait? I wasn't in too much of a hurry, though. My anxiety only grew worse as I tore open the box and fumbled through a few layers of packing peanuts with my hand. That was, until my fingers hit something soft. And that's when my anxiety turned to horror, as I pulled out 3 eyeballs. 3 human eyeballs. There was no doubt one of them was mine. I think I knew that. But the other two, it took me a moment to realize that they were probably Becky's. I threw that package in the trash. It's still there now, waiting to be taken away to the garbage dump. I'd waited to forget everything that had happened. I'd wanted to move on, but I can't. No matter how hard I try, I just can't. But I know the least I could do is warn others of this person, just so you can be cautious. I don't know where he is or how he does what he does, but trust me, you'll know he's there. You'll see his eyes glowing, and as soon as you see his eyes, you better run as fast as you can and don't look back, and pray that he doesn't catch you. Because if he does catch you, he really will be the last thing that you see.